Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Travel Stories. Tonight, we're traveling together to a place where time moves with the rhythm of the tides, where whitewashed houses cluster along narrow cobblestone streets, and where the Atlantic Ocean has shaped every aspect of life for centuries. We're visiting a traditional fishing village on the Portuguese coast, a place that holds within its weathered walls and salt-aired lanes the stories of generations who have lived by and from the sea. As you settle into this journey with me, allow yourself to relax completely. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember or worry about. Just let the images and sensations of this coastal Portuguese village wash over you gently, like the waves that have caressed these shores for thousands of years. Arrival at the village. The road that brings us to this fishing village winds along the Atlantic coastline, sometimes climbing cliff sides where we catch glimpses of the endless ocean stretching to the horizon, sometimes dipping into valleys fragrant with eucalyptus and pine. The landscape of this part of Portugal is a study in contrasts. Rugged rocks giving way to golden sand beaches, wild scrubland transitioning into carefully tended terraced fields and orchards. As we approach the village, the scent of salt begins to permeate everything, carried on breezes that have traveled across thousands of miles of open water. The village announces itself gradually. First, there are scattered quintas, traditional Portuguese farmhouses with thick stone walls and terracotta roofs, their whitewashed surfaces bright against the green of the surrounding fields. Then the houses begin to cluster more closely together, their gardens filled with fig trees and vegetable patches, oleander bushes blooming pink and white beside garden gates. The road narrows, becomes a lane, and then we're entering the village proper, where buildings press close on either side and the pavement gives way to rounded cobblestones that have been polished smooth by centuries of footsteps. Parking is found on the outskirts, in a small unpaved lot where a few other cars sit quietly in the shade of an ancient olive tree. As I step out, the first thing that strikes me is the quality of the light. There's a particular luminosity to the Portuguese coast, a golden clarity that seems to make colors more vivid and shadows deeper. The second thing I notice is the sound, not silence, but a gentle symphony of small noises. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks once, then settles. Church bells chime the hour with a mellow tone that seems to belong to another century. And beneath everything else, constant and soothing, is the distant murmur of the sea. The village sits in a natural amphitheatre its buildings cascading down a hillside toward a small protected bay. From where I stand, I can see the entire layout spread before me like a painting. The houses are predominantly white, their facades occasionally decorated with bands of yellow or blue paint around windows and doors. Red tiled roofs create a warm terracotta cascade flowing down towards the water. At the bottom of the hill, I can just make out the harbour, where colourful fishing boats are moored, their painted hulls creating bright splashes of red, blue, green and yellow against the deeper blue of the ocean. There's a particular smell here that I'll come to recognize as the essence of this place, a mixture of salt spray, fish, diesel from the boats, freshly baked bread from an unseen bakery, and underneath it all, the green scent of the ocean itself. It's not an entirely pleasant combination when analyzed separately, but together, these scents create an olfactory signature that speaks of authenticity, of a place that has been shaped by practical concerns rather than tourist expectations. As I begin to walk down the main street into the village, I notice an elderly woman sweeping the cobblestones in front of her house. She's dressed entirely in black, from her headscarf to her thick-soled shoes, and she pauses in her work to watch me pass with expression that's neither welcoming nor unfriendly, simply observant. I offer a bom dia, good day, and she nods, her weathered face creasing into what might be a smile before she returns to her sweeping. This, I will learn, is characteristic of the people here, reserved at first, not effusive in their greetings to strangers, but possessing a deep kindness that reveals itself slowly, like the sun emerging from morning mist. The street slopes gently downward, its surface a mosaic of small cobblestones arranged in traditional Portuguese patterns. On either side, the houses present their facades to the street with a kind of dignified modesty. Most are 2 or 3 stories tall, their ground floors often converted into small shops or cafes, their upper levels home to the families who have lived here for generations. Many of the buildings are adorned with azulejos, the painted ceramic tiles that are so characteristic of Portuguese architecture. These tiles serve both decorative and practical purposes, protecting the walls from moisture while adding beauty to the streetscape. The azulejos here are not the elaborate pictorial panels you might find in Lisbon or Porto, but simpler geometric patterns or repeating motifs. One house has its entire facade covered in blue and white tiles arranged in a diamond pattern. Another features a single panel beside its door, depicting a fishing boat on stylized waves. Yet another has tiles only along the base of the walls, a protective band of glazed ceramics that reaches perhaps 3 feet high. The colors are predominantly blues and whites, though here and there greens and yellows make appearances, faded somewhat by decades of sun, but still bright enough to catch the eye. As I walk deeper into the village, the buildings close in, the street narrows, and I enter a world that feels suspended between the present and the past. The lanes here were clearly not designed with automobiles in mind. They are barely wide enough for 2 people to pass comfortably, twisting and turning according to some medieval logic that prioritized shade and protection from wind over efficiency or straight lines. Laundry hangs from wrought iron balconies overhead, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow on the cobblestones below. The sheets and shirts and dresses move gently in the sea breeze, adding movement to the quiet scene. The harbour and the fishing boats. Following the downward slope of the streets, hearing the cry of seagulls growing louder, I eventually emerge at the harbour, and here the village reveals its true nature. This is not a pleasure marina filled with sleek yachts and sailboats. This is a working harbour, functional and honest in its purpose. The waterfront is lined with a broad promenade of concrete, stained with salt and fish scales, scattered with coils of rope and fishing nets in various stages of repair. Wooden crates are stacked in corners, and the smell of fish is stronger here, immediate and unmistakable. The fishing boats themselves are the heroes of this scene. There are perhaps 24 of them in the harbour this morning, some tied to the dock, others anchored a short distance offshore. They range in size from small, open boats barely 15 feet long to larger vessels of 30 or 40 feet with enclosed cabins. What unites them all is the explosion of colour. These boats are painted in vivid primary hues that seem almost defiant in their brightness. One boat is a brilliant cobalt blue with a red stripe running along its waterline. Another is sunshine yellow with green trim. A third is painted in alternating bands of red and white. The names are painted on their bows and sterns in carefully lettered script. Nossa Senhora da Conceição, Our Lady of the Conception, São Pedro, Saint Peter, Esperança, Hope, Maria II. Even now, though it's mid-morning and many boats have already returned from their night fishing, there's activity on the waterfront. Several fishermen are working on their boats, engaged in the endless maintenance that wooden vessels require. One man, probably in his 60s, with skin the color and texture of worn leather from decades of sun exposure, is painting the hull of his boat. He works methodically, his brush moving in long, steady strokes, applying a fresh coat of blue paint over areas where the old color has faded or chipped away. He doesn't look up as I pass, completely absorbed in his task. Nearby, 3 younger men are sorting through their catch on the dock. They work quickly and efficiently, their hands moving with the practiced ease of people who have done this same task thousands of times. They're separating different species of fish into plastic crates, silvery sardines into one box, larger sea bass into another, a few octopuses into a third. The fish are fresh enough that some are still moving slightly, their scales catching the light like scattered sequins. The men chat among themselves in Portuguese as they work, their voices mixing with the sound of the waves and the cries of the gulls who wheel hopefully overhead, waiting for scraps. The fishing nets are everywhere, spread out on the dock to dry, draped over railings, piled in corners. They're made of modern synthetic materials now, nylon and polyester, rather than the hemp and cotton of earlier generations. But the basic form hasn't changed in centuries. Some of the nets are being mended by an older fisherman who sits on a wooden stool, his gnarled fingers working with surprising dexterity to repair a tear in the mesh. He uses a special needle, shuttling it through the strands with movements so automatic that he can do it while gazing out to sea, lost in thoughts known only to himself. I noticed the traditional severos among the boats, the wooden fishing vessels that have been built in the Algarve and along the Portuguese coast for centuries. These boats have a particular shape, a broad beam for stability, a shallow draft that allows them to navigate both open ocean and the calmer waters of estuaries and lagoons, and often a sharp bow that cuts through waves efficiently. Many of them still bear the traditional decorative elements, painted eyes on the prow to help the boat see its way through the water according to old beliefs, and ornate scrollwork along the gunnels. The larger boats have small covered cabins where the crew can shelter from the elements during long hours at sea. Through the open door of one cabin, I can see a tiny space packed with equipment, radio, fish finder, GPS, modern technology married to ancient practice, and a small shrine with a statue of the Virgin Mary surrounded by plastic flowers. This mixture of practicality and faith is characteristic of Portuguese fishing communities, where the dangers of the sea are well understood and divine protection is earnestly sought. As I stand on the promenade, watching the activities of the harbour, I'm struck by the particular quality of the work being done here. Everything moves at a pace that seems unhurried, yet purposeful. There's no wasted motion, but there's also no sense of frantic rush. The fisherman works steadily, pausing occasionally to exchange a few words with a colleague or to light a cigarette, but always returning to their tasks. It's a rhythm set not by clocks, but by the tides and the seasons and the habits of fish. A rhythm that hasn't fundamentally changed despite all the modern equipment and regulations that now overlay this ancient practice. Several older women have set up small tables along one section of the promenade, and they're selling fish directly from the morning's catch. They sit on folding chairs behind their displays, calling out to passers-by in voices that carry clearly over the ambient noise of the harbour. Peixe fresquinho, fresh fish. Sardinas boas, good sardines. The fish are laid out on beds of ice, arranged with a care that suggests pride in the quality of the offering. The women are dressed practically in dark clothes and sensible shoes, many of them wearing aprons. Their hands are red and work roughened from years of handling fish and ice. One of these women, seeing my interest, beckons me over. Her table holds a beautiful display of the day's catch. Plump sardines with skin that shimmers silver and blue. Several large sea bream with their distinctive shape and coloring. A pile of small red mullet and a bucket containing several octopuses, their tentacles coiled like sleeping serpents. She launches into a description in rapid Portuguese, of which I understand only fragments, but her meaning is clear. Everything is fresh, caught just this morning, and I should buy some. When I shake my head regretfully, explaining in broken Portuguese that I have nowhere to cook, she nods understandingly and waves me on without offense, already turning her attention to another potential customer. The relationship between these fisherwomen and their customers is fascinating to observe. There's a ritual to the transaction that goes beyond simple commerce. A woman approaches the table, examines the fish with a practiced eye, picks up a sea bream to check its gills. Bright red means fresh. Presses gently on the flesh to test its firmness. The fisherwoman watches this inspection without offense, sometimes offering additional information. When it was caught, where, what the weather was like. There's a negotiation of price, though it's usually subtle, more about establishing relationship than driving a hard bargain. The fish is wrapped in paper, money changes hands, and there's a brief exchange of pleasantries about family, about the weather, about tomorrow's prospects before the customer moves on. Watching this dance, I'm reminded that in places like this, commerce is also about community. These women selling fish aren't anonymous vendors. their daughters and wives and mothers and grandmothers of the fishermen, they're long-time members of this community, and their transactions are embedded in a web of relationships and mutual obligations that goes far deeper than the simple exchange of money for goods. The harbour in the afternoon has a different energy than it had in the morning. The most intense work of the day is done. The catch has been sorted and sold or stored. Now there's maintenance to be done, nets to be mended, engines to be serviced. But these tasks are undertaken at a more measured pace. Several men have gathered in the shade of an awning attached to a small building that serves as an informal fisherman's social club. They're drinking small cups of espresso and discussing the day's catch, the weather forecast, the state of the fish stocks. Their conversation is punctuated by long silences that seem comfortable rather than awkward. Spaces where each man can be alone with his thoughts while still part of the group. A young man, perhaps in his early 20s, is working on an outboard motor that's been removed from one of the smaller boats and placed on a workbench. He's completely absorbed in his task, his hands black with grease, various tools spread around him. An older man, possibly his father or uncle, stands nearby offering occasional advice or observations. This passing down of mechanical knowledge from one generation to the next is another aspect of the fishing tradition, as important as the skills of reading weather and finding fish. The boats and their equipment must be kept in good working order. A breakdown at sea can be dangerous, and repair costs can eat into already tight margins. Village architecture and streets. Leaving the harbour, I begin to explore the narrow streets that web their way through the village. The architecture here tells the story of several centuries of continuous habitation, with buildings from different eras standing side by side in comfortable coexistence. The oldest structures, some dating back to the 17th or 18th century, are built of thick stone walls that have been plastered and whitewashed countless times over the generations. These buildings have small windows with deep reveals designed to keep the interior cool in summer and retain heat in winter. The doors are often made of heavy wood, painted in shades of blue or green, with iron hardware that shows the patina of age. The whitewashed walls that are so characteristic of Portuguese villages serve multiple practical purposes beyond their aesthetic appeal. In the intense summer sun, white reflects heat rather than absorbing it, helping to keep buildings cooler. The lime-based whitewash also has antiseptic properties and helps to protect the underlying walls from moisture and salt damage. which is particularly important in a coastal environment. Many residents repaint their houses every year or two, a spring ritual that keeps the village looking fresh and bright. The azulejo tiles that decorate so many of the buildings are perhaps the most distinctively Portuguese element of the architecture. The word azulejo comes from the Arabic al-zulaij, meaning polished stone, a linguistic echo of the Moorish influence on Portuguese culture. The tiles were introduced to Portugal in the 15th century and quickly became integral to the country's architectural identity. Originally imported from Spain, tile production became established in Portugal in the 16th century, and by the 18th century, Portuguese ceramicists had developed their own distinctive styles, particularly the blue and white tiles that are now considered quintessentially Portuguese. In this fishing village, the azulejos tend toward the practical rather than the elaborate. Many houses have a band of tiles running along the bottom 3 or 4 feet of their exterior walls, a protective layer that can be easily cleaned. When fish scales and salt spray settle on the tiles, they can be scrubbed away without damaging the wall beneath. This practical application doesn't preclude beauty, however. The tiles are often arranged in attractive geometric patterns or feature repeating motifs of flowers, vines, or maritime themes. I pause in front of one house where the entire facade is covered in particularly beautiful tiles. They're arranged in panels that create the illusion of depth and texture, with a pattern of blue vines and flowers on a white background. The effect is both cooling to look at, all those blues suggesting water and sky, and distinctly Portuguese in character. An older man emerges from the house as I'm admiring the tiles, and he nods to me with evident pride in his home's appearance. We exchange a few words in my broken Portuguese and his few words of English, and I learn that his grandfather put up these tiles in the 1930s, buying them from a tile maker in Lisbon. He maintains them carefully, he tells me, washing them down every few months to keep the salt from building up. The streets themselves are works of art. The cobblestones called calçada portuguesa are laid in decorative patterns that range from simple geometric designs to more elaborate imagery. In the larger squares and along the main thoroughfares, the stones are arranged to create pictures, stylized waves, fish, boats, anchors. The stones are small, about 4 inches square, cut from limestone or basalt and fitted together tightly. The light-colored limestone creates the images and borders, while the dark basalt fills the background. The effect is striking and uniquely Portuguese. Walking on these cobblestone streets requires a certain attention. The stones are smooth and can be slippery, particularly after rain or in the early morning when dew has settled on them. They are also uneven, set into the ground at slightly different heights, so the surface undulates gently beneath your feet. But there's something deeply satisfying about the feel of these old stones, the slight clicking sound your shoes make on them, the sense of walking on the same surfaces that have borne the footsteps of countless generations before you. The village has several small squares, open spaces where streets converge and where the life of the community concentrates. The largest of these is perhaps 50 feet across, paved entirely in patterned cobblestones with a simple fountain at its center. The fountain is old, its stone basin stained with mineral deposits, water trickling from a spout shaped like a fish's head. Several elderly men sit on benches around the square's perimeter, watching the world pass by with the patient observation of those who have nowhere else they need to be. They're dressed formally, despite the warm weather, dark trousers, button-up shirts, some wearing sport coats. They chat intermittently, long pauses between observations, entirely comfortable with silence. One side of this square is dominated by the village church, a modest structure that nonetheless occupies the position of honor in the community. The church is whitewashed like most of the other buildings, but its architectural elements are picked out in yellow ochre. The frames around the door and windows, the pilasters that divide the facade, the simple pediment that crowns the whole. The door is open, and stepping inside provides relief from the brightness of the day. The interior is cool and dim, smelling of old incense and candle wax. The walls are decorated with blue and white azulejo panels depicting scenes from the life of St. Peter, the patron saint of fishermen. At the front, beyond the simple wooden pews, a gilded altarpiece glows softly in the candlelight. This church has been the spiritual center of this community for centuries, witnessing baptisms and weddings and funerals, marking the passages of time and the cycles of life. Adjacent to the church is a small cemetery, its walls topped with carved stone and its interior filled with above-ground tombs in the Portuguese style. Many of the graves are well maintained with fresh flowers, but some are older, their inscriptions weathered to near illegibility. The cemetery occupies a piece of prime real estate with a view over the ocean, a final resting place that seems entirely appropriate for a community of people who spent their lives working on and beside the sea. The the residential streets branch off from the main thoroughfares in a seemingly random pattern that makes the village feel like a maze. These narrow lanes are where the daily life of the village unfolds away from the eyes of visitors. Here, windows are left open to catch the breeze, and you can hear the sounds of domestic life, a radio playing, someone practicing scales on a piano, the clatter of dishes being washed. Small balconies jut out overhead, some decorated with pots of geraniums or trailing vines. Cats sun themselves on doorsteps and walls, regarding passers-by with the proprietary air of long-time residents. Some of the houses have small street-level windows with decorative iron grills, and through these you can sometimes glimpse the interior rooms. A glimpse of a kitchen with blue-tiled walls, a living room with heavy, dark furniture that looks like it hasn't been moved in decades, a workshop where someone is repairing fishing nets. These brief glimpses feel like stolen secrets, intimate views into lives that continue according to rhythms established long before tourism became a factor in the village's economy. The Atlantic presence. No matter where you are in this village, the Atlantic Ocean makes its presence felt. The most obvious manifestation is visual. From many points in the village, you can see the sea, its surface changing color and texture with the light and wind. In the morning, when I first arrived, it was a deep blue-green, relatively calm with gentle swells that rolled in to break white on the beach. Now, as afternoon progresses, the wind has picked up slightly, and the ocean's surface has become more textured, covered with small white caps that flash and disappear. The color has shifted too, becoming a brighter, more electric blue under the strong afternoon sun. The ocean's influence extends beyond the visual. There's the constant sound of it, a baseline murmur that your ear learns to accommodate and eventually stops consciously noticing until you leave the coast and realize in the silence how much the sound of the sea has become a part of your sensory experience. The waves here are not dramatic. There are no towering breakers or thunderous crashes. Instead, the sound is more subtle, a continuous gentle susurration as waves roll up the beach and retreat, pulling sand and small stones with them, overlaying rhythm upon rhythm in an endless variation on a single theme. The ocean affects the air itself. The breeze is almost constant, sometimes just a gentle stirring, sometimes strong enough to tug at your clothes and hair. It carries the salt spray inland, coating everything with a fine, invisible layer of brine. You can taste it on your lips. It settles on your skin. Over time, it corrodes metal and weathers wood and creates the particular patina that marks coastal buildings everywhere in the world. This salt-laden air has a quality that's almost tangible, a thickness and moisture content that's different from inland air. It smells of seaweed and brine and fish, and underneath it all, something elemental and slightly mysterious. The smell of the ocean itself. The beach that fronts this village is not a pristine tourist beach with imported sand and manicured landscaping. It's a working beach where fishing boats are sometimes dragged up onto the sand, where nets are spread to dry, where the debris brought in by the tide accumulates in irregular lines along the high water mark. Seaweed, driftwood, the occasional plastic bottle or bit of rope, shells and crab carapaces. The sand itself is coarse and golden, mixed with tiny fragments of shells that crunch slightly underfoot. Walking along this beach in the afternoon, I can feel the temperature difference between the air and the sand. The sand is warm from hours of sun, hot enough that I can feel the heat through my shoes. But the breeze of the ocean is cool, creating a pleasant contrast. Several elderly women are sitting on wooden chairs at the edge of the sand, their feet bare, their skirts tucked up to allow the waves to wash over their ankles. They're chatting among themselves, occasionally pausing to watch the ocean with eyes that have observed this same view for decades. At one end of the beach, I discover a small cluster of tidal pools left by the retreating tide. These pools, protected from the waves by surrounding rocks, contain miniature ecosystems. Small fish dart between rocks, covered in green algae. Sea anemones extend their tentacles to filter feed in the protected water. Tiny crabs scuttle sideways across the sandy bottom. The water in these pools is crystal clear, and looking into them is like peering into an aquarium. A small child is crouched beside one of the larger pools, completely absorbed in watching the creatures within, occasionally reaching in to touch a rock or trace a finger through the water, creating ripples that disturb the scene before it settles back into stillness. From the beach, I can see the full sweep of the coastline. To the north, the land rises into dramatic cliffs, their faces showing the layered geology of this coast, sedimentary rocks folded and tilted by ancient tectonic forces. Seabirds nest on these cliffs, and I can see them wheeling and diving, their calls carried on the wind. To the south, the coastline is gentler, with a series of small coves separated by rocky points. In the distance, perhaps a mile down the coast, I can just make out another village, its white buildings catching the afternoon sun. The Atlantic at this latitude is never truly warm, even in summer. The water temperature reaches its peak of around 20 to 21 degrees Celsius, about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, in August and September. But for most of the year, it's significantly cooler. This is due to the influence of cold ocean currents that flow down from the north. And it's one reason why, despite Portugal's latitude, the coastal waters are refreshing rather than tropical. I watch a group of young people running into the waves, their initial whoops and exclamations at the water's temperature, clearly audible even from a distance. But they adjust quickly, as bodies do, and soon they're swimming and playing in the surf with evident enjoyment. The ocean here is not just a scenic backdrop or a recreational resource. It's a living presence that has shaped every aspect of life in this village. It determines when fishermen work, governed by tides and weather, what they eat. Fish and seafood form the foundation of the local diet, how buildings are constructed to withstand salt and wind, how people dress in layers to accommodate the temperature variations created by sea breezes, and even the rhythms of speech and thought. People here are attuned to the ocean's moods in ways that are difficult for outsiders to fully understand. They can read the sky and the water and predict what the weather will do hours or even days in advance. They know from long experience when it's safe to go out and when it's better to stay in harbour. Daily life and traditions. As afternoon settles over the village, I witness the gentle rhythms of daily life that have characterized this place for generations. In a small shop near the main square, I stop to buy a bottle of water. The shop is tiny, barely large enough for 3 or 4 customers at a time. Its shelves stocked with an eclectic mix of necessities: bread, canned goods, cleaning supplies, fresh produce in small quantities, and a selection of local products including honey, olive oil, and bottles of ginginha, the Portuguese cherry liqueur. The shopkeeper is a woman in her 50s, pleasant but not effusive. She tends the shop with the easy competence of someone who has run this business for years. As she takes my money and makes change from an old wooden cash drawer, 2 elderly women enter, and immediately the atmosphere shifts. They know each other clearly, and they launch into a conversation in Portuguese that flows rapid and comfortable, full of laughter and hand gestures. The shopkeeper joins in without missing a beat, handing me my change while simultaneously offering an opinion on whatever is being discussed. I gather from the few words I understand and the gestures they're making that they're talking about someone's grandchild, about a medical appointment, about the price of fish at market, the mundane concerns of ordinary life made interesting by the evident affection these women have for each other and the community they share. Leaving the shop, I continue my wandering through the village streets. At this hour, children are returning from school, their voices and laughter a bright counterpoint to the general quietness of the village. They travel in small groups, their backpacks bouncing, pausing occasionally to examine something interesting or to call to a friend. Several of them stop at a small pastelaria, pastry shop, where an older woman stands behind the counter, ready to serve them the after-school treats they've been anticipating all day. Pastéis de nata, custard tarts, bolas de Berlim, Portuguese donuts, or simple bread rolls filled with chorizo. In another part of the village, I come upon the fish market, a small building near the harbour where the morning's catch is sold in a more organized fashion than the informal tables on the promenade. The market is a simple structure with a concrete floor that slopes slightly toward drains, fluorescent lights overhead, and long marble counters where fish are displayed on beds of ice. The smell of fish is strong, but not unpleasant. A fresh ocean smell, rather than anything spoiled or offensive. Several vendors work the counters, their hands moving quickly as they clean fish or weigh portions or wrap purchases in paper. The customers are local residents, mostly women, who examine the fish with knowledgeable eyes, asking questions about where it was caught and when, negotiating prices with a familiarity that speaks of long-standing relationships between buyer and seller. The conversation here is lively, voices raised to be heard over the general hubbub, jokes and teasing mixed in with the serious business of choosing tonight's dinner. I watch as one woman selects several large sea bream, examining each fish carefully before nodding her acceptance. The vendor scales and guts the fish right there, his knife moving with practiced precision, the scales flying in a small glittering shower to land on the already scale-covered floor. The fish are wrapped in paper, the transaction is completed, and the woman moves on, already greeting another customer who has just entered. Outside the market, I find several older men engaged in an activity I've seen in various forms throughout Portugal. They're playing cards at a small table set up in the shade. The game appears to be Sueca, a Portuguese trick-taking card game that's popular throughout the country. The men play with intense concentration, slapping cards down on the table with emphasis, occasionally disputing a play or a score. An audience of several other men watches, offering commentary and advice that the players ignore. This daily card game, I'll learn, is an institution in the village, taking place at roughly the same time each afternoon, with largely the same participants, and has been doing so for years. The tradition of the card game is just one of many customs that structure daily life in the village. There's also the ritual of the evening paseo, the stroll, when the temperature cools and people emerge from their houses to walk the main streets, greeting neighbors, stopping to chat, participating in the communal life of the village. There's the weekly market that sets up in the main square every Saturday morning, bringing vendors from surrounding areas to sell produce, cheese, bread, clothing, and household goods. There's the Festa, the annual festival honoring the village's patron saint, when the streets are decorated with paper bunting. Processions wind through the narrow lanes, and the entire community gathers for music, dancing, and eating. The fishing tradition itself is laden with customs and practices, some dating back centuries. Many fishermen still make the sign of the cross before heading out to sea. The boats often carry small shrines or religious images for protection. There are traditional songs associated with fishing, though these are heard less frequently now than in the past. There are superstitions, certain words that shouldn't be spoken at sea, taboos about what should or shouldn't be brought on board, beliefs about lucky and unlucky days for fishing. The role of women in the traditional fishing community has been essential, though often less visible than the men's work at sea. Historically, women mended the nets, sold the fish, managed the household finances, and maintained the home and family, while men were away at sea for days or even weeks at a time. In Nazaré, the most famous Portuguese fishing village, there was a tradition of women wearing 7 petticoats, each layer representing a virtue or perhaps protection for their men at sea. While such traditional costumes are rarely seen in daily life anymore, the strength and resilience of the women in these fishing communities remains a defining characteristic. Culinary heritage. As evening approaches, I find myself thinking about food. And in a Portuguese fishing village, that means thinking about seafood. The culinary traditions here are ancient and deeply tied to what the ocean provides. I make my way to one of the small restaurants that line the street leading up from the harbour. A family-run establishment that's been serving food in this same location for 3 generations, according to the proud claim painted on a tile panel beside the door. The restaurant is simple but welcoming. The dining room has perhaps a dozen tables covered with paper tablecloths, the walls decorated with framed photographs of old fishing boats and faded images of the village from decades past. A glass-fronted refrigerator displays fresh fish on ice, and diners are encouraged to select their own fish to be grilled. The smell that pervades everything is of olive oil, garlic, and wood smoke from the charcoal grill, visible through the open door to the kitchen. I'm seated at a small table by a window overlooking the street, and a menu is brought by a young woman who might be the granddaughter of the owners. The menu is handwritten and changes daily based on what was caught that morning. Today's offerings include several types of fish: sardines, sea bream, dorada, sea bass, robalo, and grouper, garupa. There are also offerings from the cold case: octopus, clams, mussels, and several types of shellfish I don't recognize. I decide on the grilled sardines, a Portuguese classic, particularly during summer when sardines are at their peak. While I wait, I'm brought bread and butter and a small dish of olives, the standard Portuguese pre-meal offering. The bread is still slightly warm, crusty on the outside and soft within, perfect for spreading with the rich, slightly salted butter. The olives are simple green ones, not marinated in elaborate preparations. Just their natural flavor enhanced with a bit of salt. When the sardines arrive, they're beautiful. 6 plump fish, grilled whole over charcoal until their skin is crispy and slightly charred, served on a plain white plate with boiled potatoes and a simple salad of lettuce and tomato, dressed with olive oil and vinegar. There's nothing fancy about the presentation, but the quality of the ingredients and the skill in the cooking are immediately evident. The sardines are fresh enough that they taste almost sweet, their flesh firm but tender, easily separating from the bones. The charring from the grill adds a smoky flavor that complements the rich, oily taste of the fish. The potatoes are perfectly cooked, salted just right, and the salad provides a fresh counterpoint to the richness of the fish. I eat slowly, savoring each bite, understanding why sardines have been a staple of Portuguese cuisine for centuries. Grilled sardines are so central to Portuguese food culture that they have their own festival. The Feast of St. Anthony in Lisbon, celebrated every June, is sometimes called the Sardine Festival because of the countless sardines grilled on street corners throughout the city. But in coastal villages like this one, you don't need a festival as an excuse to eat sardines. They're available fresh for much of the year and are a regular part of the local diet. As I eat, I think about the other seafood dishes that define Portuguese coastal cuisine. There's bacalhau, the salted cod that Portugal imports from the cold waters of the North Atlantic and then prepares in reputedly 365 different ways, one for each day of the year, according to tradition. Bacalhau à Brás, perhaps the most famous preparation, combines shredded salted cod with matchstick potatoes and scrambled eggs, garnished with black olives and parsley. Bacalhau com natas layers cod with cream and potatoes, baked until golden. Bacalhau à Gomes de Sá includes potatoes, onions, hard-boiled eggs, and olives, bound together with olive oil. Then there's polvo, octopus, which is prepared in several traditional ways. Polvo a la Guerrero features octopus that's been boiled until tender, then roasted with generous amounts of olive oil and garlic, served with baked potatoes. It's a dish that showcases the Portuguese philosophy of allowing quality ingredients to speak for themselves, enhanced by simple but perfect preparation. The octopus, when properly cooked, should be tender enough to cut with a fork, not chewy or rubbery, and the olive oil and garlic should enhance rather than mask its natural sweetness. Clams are prepared in many ways, but one of the most popular is ameijoas a pulau pato, named after a 19th century poet who loved the dish. The clams are cooked simply with white wine, garlic, olive oil, and cilantro, creating a fragrant broth that's perfect for soaking up with bread. The dish showcases the sweetness of fresh clams and the aromatic combination of garlic and cilantro that's so characteristic of Portuguese cooking. Cataplana de Marisco takes its name from the traditional copper cooking vessel used to prepare it, a hinged pan that seals tightly to trap flavors. The dish is a medley of shellfish, clams, mussels, prawns, sometimes lobster, cooked with tomatoes, onions, garlic, and white wine, often with the addition of chorizo sausage for depth of flavor. The cataplana method of cooking ensures that all the seafood steams in the aromatic broth, creating a dish that's both visually impressive and deeply flavorful. Caldeirada is the Portuguese fish stew, similar in concept to French bouillabaisse, but with its own distinct character. Different types of fish are layered with potatoes, tomatoes, onions, and bell peppers, seasoned with bay leaves and parsley, and cooked slowly until all the flavors meld together. Each region And indeed, each cook has their own variation, but the basic principle remains the same. Celebrate the bounty of the sea with minimal intervention. After finishing my sardines, I'm asked if I want dessert. The options are simple: pudim flan, creme caramel, arroz dolce, sweet rice pudding flavored with cinnamon and lemon, or fresh fruit. I choose the arroz dolce, which arrives in a small bowl, its surface decorated with a pattern drawn in ground cinnamon. It's sweet, but not cloying, the rice creamy, the cinnamon and lemon providing subtle aromatic notes. It's comfort food, the kind of dessert that Portuguese mothers and grandmothers have been making for their families for generations. The meal is accompanied by vinho verde, literally green wine, though the color is actually a pale yellow. Vinho verde is a young, slightly sparkling wine from northern Portugal, light and refreshing, with a slight effervescence that cleanses the palate. It's the perfect accompaniment to seafood, crisp and clean enough not to overpower delicate fish flavors. Coffee follows. A beaker, the Portuguese espresso. It arrives in a small cup, thick and strong and black, a jolt of caffeine and flavor that provides the perfect conclusion to the meal. The Portuguese take their coffee seriously, and even in this simple village restaurant, the espresso is excellent, properly extracted with a good creamer on top. As I pay the bill, which is remarkably reasonable, a reminder that Portugal remains one of Europe's best values for food and dining, I chat briefly with the owner, who has emerged from the kitchen. She asks in English if the meal was satisfactory, and when I express my genuine appreciation, she beams with pride. The fish was caught this morning by her cousin, she tells me. The potatoes came from her garden. The olive oil was pressed from olives grown on her family's small plot in the countryside. This direct connection between producer and consumer, this short chain from sea or soil to table, is part of what makes the food here so good. Historical context and maritime heritage. To understand this village and others like it along the Portuguese coast, it's necessary to understand something of Portugal's profound connection to the sea. This is a country whose history has been shaped by maritime exploration and fishing to a degree matched by few others in the world. Portugal's coastline stretches for more than 900 kilometers along the Atlantic, and for centuries, the ocean has been both a highway to adventure and discovery, and a source of sustenance and livelihood for coastal communities. The Portuguese Age of Discovery in the 15th and 16th centuries saw this small nation establish the first global maritime empire, with territories stretching from Brazil to Africa to India to the Spice Islands. Explorers like Vasco da Gama, Ferdinand Magellan, and Bartolomeu Diaz became legends, their voyages opening new routes and establishing Portugal as a maritime superpower. The legacy of this age is still visible throughout Portugal, in the monuments and place names, in the pride that Portuguese people take in their seafaring history, and in the national character that prizes courage, endurance, and a willingness to venture into the unknown. But alongside this grand narrative of exploration and empire, there's another maritime story, the daily, unglamorous, essential work of fishing. For every famous explorer, there were thousands of anonymous fishermen who went to sea day after day, year after year, generation after generation, providing food for their families and their communities. This tradition of fishing is ancient, predating written history. Archaeological evidence suggests that people have been fishing along the Portuguese coast since prehistoric times using techniques that evolved slowly over millennia. First-hand gathering of shellfish from tidal zones, then the use of hooks and spears, then nets and traps, then boats that allowed them to venture farther from shore. By the time of the Roman occupation of the Iberian Peninsula, fishing was already a well-established industry. The Romans, who appreciated good fish sauce, established fish processing operations along the Portuguese coast, salting and preserving fish for export throughout the empire. The ruins of Roman fish salting factories can still be seen in various locations along the coast, testament to the long continuity of the fishing tradition. The techniques of traditional fishing were refined over centuries of experience. The zavigar, an ancient method of beach seining still practiced in a few locations, involves a large net being deployed from a boat and then dragged back to shore, sometimes pulled by oxen, or, in more recent times, by tractors. It's a communal activity requiring the coordinated effort of multiple people, and watching a Xavaga operation is like witnessing a practice that has changed little over hundreds of years. The boats themselves evolved to meet the specific needs of Portuguese waters and fishing methods. The Saviro, the traditional fishing boat of the Algarve, has a distinctive design that balances stability with the ability to navigate both open ocean and shallow lagoons. These boats were traditionally built by hand, using techniques passed down through families of boat builders, each craftsman adding their own touches to a basic template that remained consistent. The boats were made of wood, usually pine or oak, and required constant maintenance to remain seaworthy. The bright colors that characterize these boats served both practical and aesthetic purposes. They made boats easier to identify at a distance, and they reflected the pride that fishermen took in their vessels. The building and maintenance of these wooden boats is itself a dying art. Few young people are interested in learning the skills required, and modern fiberglass boats are easier to maintain and more cost-effective for commercial fishing. Organizations dedicated to preserving maritime heritage work to maintain and restore traditional boats, but it's an uphill battle against economic realities and changing times. The fishing communities developed their own cultures and traditions, somewhat separate from inland Portugal. Life in a fishing village followed different rhythms, determined by tides and seasons and the migrations of fish, rather than by agricultural cycles. The work was dangerous. Storms could come up suddenly. Boats could founder. Men were lost at sea. Almost every fishing village has a monument to local fishermen lost to the ocean, and most families in these communities can tell stories of fathers or uncles or grandfathers who went out one day and never returned. This danger fostered a deep religious faith. The patron saints of fishermen, particularly Saint Peter, are honored with festivals and processions. Churches in fishing villages often contain ex-votos, small votive offerings left by fishermen who survived dangerous situations at sea, giving thanks for their deliverance. The tradition of blessing the fishing fleet, where a priest blesses boats and prays for the safety of the fishermen, continues in many communities. The role of women in these fishing communities, while different from the men's work at sea, was equally essential. Women traditionally mended nets, sold fish, managed household economics, and held families and communities together while men were away at sea. In some villages, particular forms of traditional dress developed, most famously in Nazaré, where women wore 7 skirts, representing 7 virtues, or perhaps 7 days of the week, dark colors, and headscarves. While such traditional costumes are now mainly preserved for festivals and special occasions, they serve as reminders of distinct cultural identities that developed in these coastal communities. Seasonal transformations. The fishing village I'm visiting exists in a state of gentle transformation as it moves through the annual cycle of seasons. Each season brings its own character, its own rhythms and moods, its own particular beauty and challenges. Summer, which is now drawing toward its end, is the season when the village feels most alive. The population swells with the arrival of Portuguese families from Lisbon and Porto who have second homes here or who rent apartments for a few weeks of beach vacation. The restaurants are full in the evenings. The beach is populated with families, children building sandcastles and playing in the waves, while parents watch from beach chairs or towels spread on the sand. The fishing boats go out at night and return in the early morning, their holds full of sardines and other species that are at their peak during these warm months. The summer weather is characterized by long sunny days and warm temperatures, though the Atlantic breezes keep it from becoming oppressively hot. High temperatures typically range from the mid-20s to low 30s Celsius, mid-70s to low 90s Fahrenheit. Rain is rare during these months. The ocean water temperature reaches its annual peak, though it never becomes truly warm by Mediterranean standards. The light has that particular Portuguese quality, golden and clear, that artists have been trying to capture for centuries. As autumn arrives, usually sometime in September, the character of the village begins to shift. The tourist families depart, the Portuguese children return to school, and the village settles back into its quieter, more permanent rhythm. The fishing continues, but the focus shifts to different species as water temperatures drop and fish migrations change. The weather remains generally pleasant through October and into November, though there's more variability, with occasional rainy days and stormy periods when the Atlantic flexes its muscles and sends larger waves crashing against the shore. Autumn is in many ways the most beautiful season here. The intense heat of summer has passed, but the weather is still warm enough for comfortable outdoor activities. The light takes on a softer quality, and the sunsets become particularly spectacular, the sky often painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple that seem almost unreal in their vividness. This is the season of harvests inland, and the village markets fill with produce from the surrounding countryside. Late tomatoes, peppers, grapes, figs, quinces, chestnuts. Winter transforms the village yet again. The population contracts to just the permanent residents. The beach becomes a lonely place, visited mainly by the occasional walker with a dog. The fishing boats still go out, weather permitting, but there are more days when they remain in harbour, rocking gently at their moorings as storms pass through. The weather is mild by Northern European standards. Average temperatures in January hover around 12 degrees Celsius or 54 degrees Fahrenheit. But there are periods of cold rain and strong winds that make it feel colder than the thermometer suggests. Winter is when the Atlantic shows its power. Storm systems roll in from the ocean, bringing heavy rain and high winds. The waves become impressive, crashing against the seawall and sending spray high into the air. On the most turbulent days, the entire village seems to hunker down. Shutters closed against the wind, smoke rising from chimneys. The streets nearly empty, except for the occasional person hurrying from one destination to another, head down against the weather. But winter also has its compensations. The air is crystal clear after the rain passes. The light is different, lower and more slanting, creating dramatic shadows. The village takes on a kind of stoic beauty, stripped of summer's ornamentation and revealed in its essential character. This is when you see most clearly what the village really is. A working community of people who have adapted to life on the edge of the ocean, who understand its moods and its dangers, who respect its power while making their living from its bounty. Spring arrives gradually, announced by subtle signs: the return of certain birds, the budding of fruit trees, the gradual warming of the air and water. March and April can be variable, with beautiful sunny days interspersed with periods of rain. But by May, the weather has generally settled into a more stable pattern. The fishing activity increases as water temperatures rise and fish return to the coastal waters. The village begins to prepare for the summer season. Buildings are repainted. Boats receive fresh coats of paint. Repairs are made to docks and infrastructure. This is also the season of festivals. Many villages hold their main religious celebrations in spring, processions and celebrations honoring patron saints. The streets are decorated with colorful bunting. Temporary altars are set up, and the entire community participates in celebrations that blend religious devotion with social festivity. These festivals are opportunities for villages to affirm their communal identity, to honor their traditions, and to celebrate the continuity of their community across generations. Surrounding landscapes. While the village itself is captivating, the surrounding landscape offers its own rewards for exploration. Just north of the village, a coastal walking path leads along the cliff tops, offering spectacular views of the ocean and the coastline. The path is not difficult, mostly flat with occasional gentle inclines, and it's clearly well used by both locals and visitors. The path is marked but not paved, just packed earth and stone, winding between low vegetation. The vegetation here is characteristic of the Portuguese coast. Low, tough plants, adapted to salt spray and wind. There are wild rosemary and lavender, releasing their aromatic oils when brushed against. There are cistus bushes with their distinctive white or pink flowers when in bloom. There are pines, particularly the maritime pine, their trunks bent by constant wind, their branches reaching inland as if trying to escape the ocean. In spring, wildflowers blanket the cliff tops. Yellow broom, purple vetch, white daisies, creating a carpet of color that contrasts beautifully with the blue of the ocean. Walking this path, you encounter dramatic views of the coastline. The cliffs drop steeply to the ocean below, where waves crash against rocks that have been sculpted by millennia of erosion into fantastic shapes. There are sea caves visible at the base of some cliffs, and arches where the ocean has worn completely through the rock. Seabirds nest on the cliff faces, gulls certainly, but also cormorants. And if you're lucky, you might spot a peregrine falcon soaring on the updrafts. At intervals, the path descends to small beaches nestled in coves between rocky headlands. These beaches are often deserted, accessible only to those willing to make the walk. The sand here is pristine, unmarked except by the patterns left by the waves and perhaps the tracks of birds. The water in these protected coves is remarkably clear, and on calm days you can see down to the sandy bottom, even in water several feet deep. These secluded beaches are perfect for quiet contemplation, for swimming in relative solitude, for simply sitting and watching the ocean. Inland from the village, the landscape transitions to agricultural land. The fields here are small, bounded by stone walls or hedges, a patchwork of different crops and purposes. There are vegetable gardens producing tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, and other staples of the Portuguese diet. There are fruit orchards, figs, almonds, citrus. There are vineyards producing grapes for local wine. There are olive groves, the silvery green leaves of the olive trees shimmering in the breeze. The countryside is crisscrossed by small roads and paths that connect the village to neighboring settlements and to farms and homesteads scattered across the landscape. Walking these lanes in the late afternoon is to step into a more traditional Portugal. You might pass an elderly woman leading a donkey laden with bundles of firewood or vegetables. You might encounter an ancient tractor puttering along, or a farmer returning from his fields with tools over his shoulder. The pace here is slower, more deliberate, governed by the rhythms of agriculture rather than modern life. Scattered across this landscape are traditional agricultural buildings, small stone barns and storage sheds, animal shelters, the occasional windmill, no longer operational, but maintained as a piece of heritage. Many of these structures are very old, their stone walls thick enough to provide insulation, their design unchanged for centuries because it works. It's adapted to the local conditions and needs. Evening and closing. As the day draws toward its close, I make my way back to the harbour to watch the sunset. This is a ritual I've observed. Each evening, people gather at the waterfront to watch the sun sink toward the horizon. Some sit on benches or on the seawall. Others stand in small groups, chatting while they watch. There's a reverent quality to the gathering, an acknowledgement that we're witnessing something significant, something that happens every day but never becomes routine or boring. The sunset this evening is spectacular. The sky begins to color an hour before the actual sunset. Pale yellow fading to orange and then to pink. As the sun approaches the horizon, the colors intensify, becoming more saturated, more vivid. The ocean surface reflects the sky, becoming a rippling mirror of orange and gold. The clouds catch fire, edges glowing brilliant pink and orange against darker purple and blue. The fishing boats in the harbour are silhouetted against this light show, their masts and rigging creating stark geometric patterns against the coloured sky. A few late returning boats make their way into harbour, their engines throbbing, their wakes creating trails of gold across the water. The seabirds that have been wheeling overhead all day settle for the night, their calls gradually fading as darkness approaches. As the sun finally slips below the horizon, there's a collective sigh, an acknowledgement of beauty shared. The colors don't immediately fade, but linger. The sky is still glowing even as the first stars begin to appear in the darker eastern sky. The street lights along the promenade flicker on, their yellow glow warm against the gathering dusk. The village takes on a different character as night falls. Lights appear in windows, creating patterns of illumination against the darkening hillside. The restaurants begin to fill with dinner customers. The sounds of the day, the bustle and activity give way to quieter evening sounds. Conversation from the cafes, music from somewhere, the ever-present murmur of the ocean, perhaps the barking of a dog. I make my way back through the narrow streets, now lit by occasional street lamps that create pools of light in the darkness. The cobblestones glow where the light hits them. Shadows are deep in doorways and alleys. Somewhere, someone is playing a guitar, the notes drifting through an open window. The music is melancholy and beautiful, unmistakably Portuguese, perhaps a fragment of fado, that uniquely Portuguese song form that speaks of longing and loss and fate. This fishing village, like all such places, exists in a delicate balance between preservation and change, between honoring traditions and adapting to new realities. The young people here face a choice: stay in the village and continue the life of their parents and grandparents, or leave for the cities where there are more opportunities, but also the loss of this unique way of life. The village is quieter than it was 50 years ago. Its population smaller, its economy more dependent on tourism and less purely on fishing than in the past. Yet something essential persists. The ocean is still here, still shaping life and thought and culture. The boats still go out, though there are fewer of them. The traditions continue, though sometimes in modified forms. The village endures, adapted to each new challenge, while maintaining its core identity as a place where people live close to the sea, where the rhythms of life are determined by tides and weather and the seasons of the ocean. As I prepare to leave this village and this journey together, I carry with me sensory memories that will linger. The taste of fresh sardines grilled over charcoal, the smell of salt and sea, the sight of colourful boats bobbing in the harbour, the sound of waves and seabirds and church bells, the feeling of rounded cobblestones beneath my feet. But more than these specific memories, I carry a deeper understanding of a way of life that has endured for centuries, a recognition of the strength and resilience of communities that make their living from the ocean, and an appreciation for the beauty that can be found in simple things: honest work, fresh food, traditional buildings, and the eternal presence of the sea. And so, as the night settles fully over this Portuguese fishing village, as the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, as the waves continue their eternal rhythm against the shore, I'll leave you here, in this peaceful place, to drift into your own dreams. Perhaps you'll dream of cobblestone streets and whitewashed houses, of colourful boats and fresh-caught fish, of the endless ocean and the people who have built their lives beside it. If you've enjoyed this journey to a Portuguese fishing village, I'd be grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Sleepy Travel Stories. Your support helps me continue creating these peaceful explorations of beautiful places around the world. Thank you for traveling with me tonight, and I wish you the most restful and peaceful sleep. Boa noite. Good night.